All right. Thanks, y'all, for joining. So, the subject today that we're going to talk about is how to convince your organization DEI is still a priority. So, if you're just now joining us or haven't shared on the chat, just simple intros, name, where you're joining us from location wise, and what's going on in your world with DEI. And we're seeing lots of different messages on the chat. Some folks that are in flux, some that are just getting started, some that are knee deep in the work, some that have been leading it for a long time, might be leading it in a new organization. Because we know DEI work. One of the interesting statistics I will say is that most folks stay in DEI roles about at 1.8 years, so less than 2 years on average. So there's a lot of transitioning happening right now with some organizations cutting budgets, some starting budgets. We're working with a mixture of all of them. So we want to hear from everybody's perspectives because I think it's definitely some uncertain times, just globally, economically. Certainly in the DI space, we're not going to be prevented from seeing those uncertainties emerge. And how do we come together, stronger together? I truly believe in the spirit of allies, of all of us collectively coming together. We can sort through this. So that's our goal for today. If I haven't met you before, I do a lot of research on the subject of allyship, how to be an inclusive leader. I do speaking, training, and consulting on all things DEI. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know many folks use different acronyms. So I welcome all of that. That's just about 60% of my clients use that acronym. So that's the one I go with most of the time. I host a few podcasts on the subject and my why for DEI, which I think is just such a compelling thing that we probably need to go back to, is reminding ourselves of our why for this work. Is truly about the next generation. When I think about myself entering the workforce 20 years ago and what my daughters are experiencing and will be experiencing, is I just don't want that same tired conversation. I don't want us to be talking about women leaders and why we need to fix them and why racism is something that we need to address in the workplace. I hope that the conversation is much further along for this next generation. Oh, thanks, Diana. And I might not be saying your name correctly. So, Taynana, just introduced herself in the chat as a member of the Indigenous community. Thank you, Taynana. Thank you. I really appreciate you helping me learn to say your name properly. That's something we all can do better as allies, is learning others' names. So thanks, Tainana, for sharing that. And so my why is really centered on kiddos. That's why we're doing some work in the Little Allies. We have a nonprofit where we're donating resources to organizations that are doing great work with kids but don't have diversity content. So that's our side hustle that we're doing. But most of our day job, the work we do on our team, is really to help organizations pivot to the next level. How do I do inclusion better? How do I get my leaders bought into this? What's our strategy? What's our roadmap? That kind of thing. And so my hope is that the future is brighter, that it's better. I definitely want that for our kiddos. I led a session yesterday. And the first hour we spent talking about everybody's why for DEI. And 8-hour agenda, you're like, whoa, that's a lot of time. But these folks were all over the organization, different locations, different business units, had not met in person in all of the COVID years. So it was a reminder to me, and if that's helpful for y'all, the importance of coming together and sharing our whys for this work and telling our stories. And they don't have to be, personal. Some people shared very personal narratives. Others just shared a wish, a hope, for difference and change. And something that I think is really important. And that business case, it's been around for a real long time. And I'll share a bunch of data with you that I've been perusing and collecting over the last few months, especially with all the uncertainty with DEI going on. But the business case in particular is one that I struggle with because it's been around for an awfully long time. For us to continue to have to revisit data that's been available for 10 plus years seems odd to me. We probably wouldn't do that with innovation. We probably wouldn't do that with other parts of our business or organization. So it just doesn't seem genuine, I get that we have to show the return on investment, and that's maybe a pivot that we need to go to in the DEI space is how are we showing this investment is leading to outcomes? And I'm not saying necessarily immediate business outcomes. It's not like sales, instantly go up or, our customer relevance goes up, which probably does. But how do we measure that? It's more about how do we measure the impact that we're creating? So what is the knowledge level increase? What's the activity level increase? What's the behavior level change? What is the perception level difference? So anyway, all that to say, the topics that we're going to cover today is really one from a place of data. Lots of different studies that have come out recently. So I've got stuff from 2021 on. I tried to pluck some recent content because, as you know, it has gotten a little feisty lately in the last 3 to 4 months in particular. I started noticing it in Q4 with budget planning for this year, and a lot of organizations that are still finalizing their budgets, believe it or not, for 2023. Thanks, Catherine. Shared a link to our work that we're doing with the Little Allies as well. I just kind of question this morning from a previous client that said, hey, do you know any resources to talk about this at home? Like, yes, I do. Shameless plug. But I would say too, if you're curious about the conversation earlier, and kids of all ages, young people of all ages, and they don't have to be yours, it could be nieces, nephews, grandkids, neighbors. Have a conversation with a young person, and it really does rejuvenate me on the why for this work as well. So all that to say, we'll go through some data. Then we'll talk about why now is the time for accountability with DEI and tools to reinforce accountability within your organization. And then I'll leave with kind of the 5 things we're seeing good conversation around still in DEI. It's less about the training, which I'm sure y'all being close to this work, probably no surprise there. Certainly virtual training, there's definitely a fatigue factor there. But the pivot has been interesting to some other tools. So stick around, we'll talk about measurement and more. And then at the end, we'll welcome questions throughout. So feel free to share your questions in the chat. I'll answer those as we go. We have some interactive exercises too for you to share on Poll Everywhere, our software that makes word clouds. And you can ask anonymous questions on there as well. So at the end, feel free to pop in your questions and we'll get to those as well. So the data points, this is just kind of more subjective. So here's what I'm hearing. I've been doing DI work now going on to be 9 years this year, which again, what I said earlier, the average tenure is less than 2. There is a very big emotional fatigue, compassion fatigue, exhaustion that just comes with this work. I certainly am not immune to it. So I just want to express my empathy to folks here that I know many of you are experiencing this, whether it's just virtual meeting fatigue. 2020, 2021, we just like hit DEI training up. I was doing sessions 3, 6, 9 times a year, even 12 times a year with one of our clients. That's a lot. And so I think people, what they experience is like, okay, either it's like, we checked that box, it's done, or it's like, whoa, let's just take a breather, right? And so I get where people are coming from. That's unfortunate, but we did hit things kind of with a big fire hose those couple of years. So we started to see a drop off last year. And in fact, there's some data I'll share on this, but we actually receded a couple percentage points on organizations that had active DEI programs last year. It's somewhere around 40% right now. We're also seeing, of course, burnout, mental health issues, other vying priorities. This R word we keep throwing around scares people. Uncertainty, marketplace uncertainty, global issues, the war in Ukraine. I mean, there's just only so much people can process right now. We get the feedback, the same people keep coming to our training or to our programs or employee resource group events. We're not getting new allies. And that's problematic, right? If we're kind of reaching a tipping point and it doesn't feel like we're reaching the masses. And more importantly, what I notice, this happened yesterday, happens very often, it's a room full of women talking about it. And I'm a white woman. I get that more of us need to show up. I'm not saying that we're innocent, but we're not seeing men hardly at all in the conversation. And if we do, it's the same ones that keep coming. And so there's a real challenge out here to reach the majority group because it's disheartening to see you're doing all this work often in your free time or as extra assigned work that you're not necessarily getting paid for. We know that women are largely stepping up to doing. it and aren't being rewarded or compensated or even included on your performance review for doing it. So that's exhausting. And then we just have a lot of budget uncertainty right now. In all the years I've been doing this, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat if you've um, just sent out, yeah, feel free if there's, like, I'll add more research. Uh, if you have seen this before, this is pretty unprecedented for me. And to be fair, other than 2020, obviously with COVID, that was a major shutdown and, things went to zero for a few months and of course picked back up because of what happened. I'm hoping something like that doesn't need to happen again, but this work can ebb and flow with the news cycle. But I've never seen budget level uncertainty where budgets are still being finalized this late in the year, which seems interesting. I don't know if that's an excuse or that's the reality, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And folks that had DEI budgets last year, a lot of our clients are saying it got cut in half, or I'd earmarked this for this program and that earmark went away. So I just want to kind of pause here. We have a polling software where you can anonymously share. So I'd love to hear folks' perspectives. Catherine just shared the link in the chat. It's up at the top of the slide as well. And you can actually pull out your phone and text 22333 and just text pivot point, and it'll log you in. It's anonymous. It's not tracking your info. I promise you won't get spammed. But it's a really helpful tool that we love to use with our clients for anonymous sharing. And this is how we'll take questions anonymously at the end as well. So sometimes we've got a burning issue or question, and maybe we don't want to speak into it because we're afraid, no one else is experiencing it, or people might have this figured out already. So it's a really nice way and to ask your candid questions and to share your feedback. So just curious, temperature check. I'm exhausted. I hear you. I hear you. You are not alone. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm feeling burned out by the lack of work support. I'm sorry to hear that. And that's very real. I'm always tired. Yeah, I don't know if it's a new level of tired. The last few years have been exhausting. It has been exhausting in this work. So sometimes I don't even think we know. And self-care isn't a sustainable solution. I love that principle, but as much as I've been doing that, there's only so many walks and baths and massages you can do. Same people avoid it. Yeah, and there's not even accountability for these people. That's what I get frustrated by. It's like so-and-so has not participated in any DEI programming or work, and they're a leader. And that's okay. What message are you sending to your organization about this being a priority? I like an interesting analogy. I heard a couple analogies. Frustrated that people still don't see why. Yeah, we still need to go to the why. I mean, I give a presentation constantly about why, the business case. And I like to focus on the human case though, so I can whittle that in. But yeah, the why is still, I don't really care. They just pretend. Yeah, it's like this facade of like, we put it on our website, we made our donation and statement, and where's the real work? I get that. Those that are close to it see that falseness more clearly too. And that's sad. I'm sad to hear that. Oh, conversations are critical, but having conversations without action is disheartening. Yep. Yep. And the actions, people want that. They want the magic bullet solution. I did an open Q&A this week, and that was the thing. It's like, tell me how to tell our leaders what to do. And I have practices I teach. It's not that I don't have an answer to that, but I can't tell you, like, read this book and talk to somebody and do this. I mean, it's just not a methodical process like that. It's iterative. It takes time. It takes intention. It takes consistency. Performative actions take away from what really needs to be done. Yeah. Not enough bandwidth or staff to get what needs to be done. Yeah, I'm hearing folks saying I lost, the head count I requested, or I lost existing head count, or I lost my job. And I've had to transition. Quite a few folks have reached out to me that have lost their positions, or consultants like me that had work dry up that have asked, how can I partner? How could I work with you? And like, I'm experiencing the same thing. I wish we had more opportunities. So to me, it kind of feels like the pie did shrink and get a bit smaller. Burnout has impacted my work and has caused me to lose some of the most active members of the DEI in my organization left the council or even the company because they didn't see the results they would. Personally, I've dealt with burnout and been able to continue acknowledging we can't get everyone. And have to set realistic expectations. And I appreciate that. Realistic expectations. What I really like for this, and we'll talk about this in the back end, is road mapping, getting a few key priorities. I work with teams a lot. They'll come up with like 20 different ideas. And it's like, that the ability to execute on all of those ideas is very, very low. So let's pick how many can we actually do, 2 or 3. Let's pick those and action plan those out. Yeah, you stepped away from the committee. It's tiring. Our board and leadership are and providing the bare minimum. I left the committee because it was exhausting, and now I'm looking to leave the company. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's what's happening with diverse talent. We're seeing folks with passion for diversity leave organizations, and I have to hope the ones that are doubling down and really showing their firm commitment to DEI will win in the long term. It's not a short-term game. It definitely is a long-term game. I think it's part of the challenge with those of us that work for organizations that go by quarterly returns. When your priority is a quarterly profit number, it's easy to slash DEI. It's not the right thing to do, but it's easy to justify doing that because it's a long-term investment, not a short-term investment. The analogy I heard, is kind of like it's investing in research and development, right? We rarely get those payoffs in 1, 2, 3 years. It's more of a 5, 10-year lookout for most organizations. It also reminds me of the work I did back in safety. Did anyone have a background or remember? This was the early 2000s when safety became a big focus for corporations. So I was a safety manager at a construction company. So it was actually quite dangerous work. And we made a huge pivot to say everyone's accountable for safety and no job is too important that we're not going to do it safely. And it kind of reminds me of the mantra on DEI, like, can we make that a non-negotiable and truly hold people accountable to that behavior because it is a shift. I haven't seen that kind of accountability with it, but we'll talk about ways we can pivot to that because it feels very similar to me, but it's plateaued in the DA space now. So I promised you data, loads of data. Catherine will share the links and we'll send a follow-up note with all the links too, but just in case you want to dig in or see where we're getting this stuff from. Forbes and HBR and McKinsey and Company, those are 3 that I regularly follow and get their newsletters and get their daily alerts. And I always find a good DEI article, at least once or twice a week. HBR has backed off a little bit lately, but don't even get me started. They did just have a good one on women's leadership programs today. That was really counterintuitive and good. But all that to say, inclusive teams we know make better decisions, more than like a 2x better rate. Higher revenue rates, and then that profitability number, if y'all are familiar with McKinsey and Company, I always go to that one for the business case because there's so many anecdotal data pieces you can pull from that. But they have gender diversity at leadership teams at 20% higher. And then if you layer in racial diversity, 36% higher. So I love asking the question, what other area of your business produces these types of returns? And I just love what leaders come up with. Like, well, now that you mention it, it's like, okay. And Catherine, if you want, I put the links in the footer of these slides. So if you ever want to just drop those in, we can share that in a post note too. But just in case you haven't seen some of this data, there is so much of it. It has been readily available for a very long time. But I think it's helpful to see the data and ask the question, like, where else are we getting this return? Right? Because we invest, the place where we invest a lot is in sales training and sales coaching and development because we feel like we get an instant lift on sales. I'd argue probably don't, and it's really hard to measure that. But are you seeing these kind of returns? So those were a bunch of the articles too that we'll share in the back end too to make it easy for you. And feel free to share other articles that do a good job of the business case. Those are my 3 go-tos, and those are all within, McKinsey stuff's every year. The Forbes pieces, I think, are in the last 3 or 4 years. So you could find a new report, but it would probably say similar things. I always like to point to Gen Z too. We know this is the most diverse generation yet. They have a non-white, will have a non-white majority. They will be 20, I think it's like upper 20s, close to 30% of the workforce here in the next couple of years. So much like the millennials 10 years ago that were giving corporate all these headaches, Gen Z is ready to go. And I love this stat. Monster just did a research study. This is recent, this last few months. 83% said that the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion is important when choosing an employer. And they will ask about it in the interview process. And if you don't have a good answer, they know that you're not genuine. So I love this. I love a little fear with leaders and hiring managers. Like, so what's going to be your answer when they ask? Because they're going to ask. Share this stat. And then it's like, oh, shoot. Because do we want to be relevant to our future employees and future customers and communities we hope to serve? Interesting. Probably should be doing more of this. So I hope Gen Z comes with the same tenaciousness that my generation did and isn't quieted like past generations were, because systems are still alive and well. And so this is a good study that I like to point to too. This is another one. So again, this week was a busy week and a strategy session. One of the leaders said, she's like, I know the unemployment numbers. I believe she said right now there's 11 million open jobs and only 6 million people looking for those jobs. So the labor shortage thing, despite what people are thinking about economic uncertainty, the labor shortage is not going away. It's persisting. And Gen Z is actually really well positioned to leverage this power, unlike previous generations, because when we have baby boomers retiring much higher rates and less folks entering the workforce and lower birth rates and less immigration, because immigration actually peaked in the mid 2000s. That's why Gen Z is so racially and ethnically diverse. And so the shift of power of the employer is not in power, the employee is. And so if that's helpful data, I love that stat and I love that conversation. We don't need to, beat people up with data. We can just sprinkle it into a conversation like, did you know? That's interesting. I wonder what we're doing about that. Curiosity can always be a helpful tool. Convince people to think differently. Here's another one, Edelman. Have y'all seen Edelman's data? So they just did this data. The 2023 report, I believe, is available now. This is data I just pulled from their website, their most recent stuff. And they're finding that increasingly people trust businesses, not institutions as much. So certainly not the government, certainly not other organizations. They're looking to corporate to stand up and advocate and have an impact on society. This really begs an interesting question, like, what are we doing? Yes, there's a Patagonia out there. There's a Ben and Jerry's. There's a few others, but there's not a lot of organizations you would say are really standing up for social justice issues, at least not the big ones. Of course, there are some wonderful small and medium-sized companies. And when we have this next generation, especially voting with their dollars, voting with their employment decisions, and that there will be an increased accountability for this. And so I love the Edelman data. It's great. Another great kind of piece of data to seed in the conversation. Here's another one. So this is this is Gallup. McKinsey and Gallup both measure this. I grabbed the Gallup data just to show overall burnout, just like y'all were talking about at the beginning. You're not alone. Look at this, 76%. I mean, I can't even imagine how we're okay with this as a society. Like, this is not sustainable. And it's gendered. So we know that more women feel this than men. We also know younger folks feel this more than the more experienced folks. And we know caregivers and people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, also a much higher rate. So I didn't break it down by all those levels, but just trust me, there's tons of data here. McKinsey breaks it down for gender. The millennials data I have cited. We can share that with you as well. So it's interesting because a lot of times baby boomers are the ones leading organizations, but if they're not experiencing the burnout, it may feel like it's someone else's problem. Because again, lived experiences. I grew up where you went to work, you didn't like question things other than you got your paycheck. That's the thanks you get. Loyalty was rewarded for past generations too, whereas it is not now. So lots of different trends have emerged, but leaders today sometimes don't have the same lived experience as younger folks, of women, of people with diverse backgrounds. I think this data really speaks to a burning platform for DEI work. How do we help people feel less burnout and more included? Because we know inclusion is the antidote to burnout, but rarely do people feel that type of inclusion. So I like to tell people like, all right, keep kicking the can, keep putting off the DEI work, but the runway is only getting shorter. Because I would venture to say, 5 years, I used to say 5 years, maybe 3 years now, uh, you're going to be less relevant to the people you hope to attract, whether that's employees, community members, customers. You're just not going to be as relevant when you're not focused on this work. And so tell me when that happens, but I hope it's not another crisis situation that brings people to this work, because then it's too late. People are anxious. Let's do it while we're still ahead. And then if it was an easy problem, we would have solved it already. And this bears repeating, I think, especially for folks in the majority group, the people you said that aren't coming to the DEI programs or events, aren't participating or engaging. It doesn't feel like a problem that they've experienced. And so it feels like we can put that problem on other people to solve. Oh, okay, women have an issue. Oh, people of color have an issue. Those with disabilities, LGBTQ plus folks. Okay, you all solve it. It's like, wait a second, we didn't create these systems that hinder us. Why are we tasked with solving a problem that negatively affects us already? And we're not giving adequate resources or support to do. So if it was easy, we would have done it already. I think that helps temper people's expectations, like centuries of inequality. You want it to be solved in 2 years? Let's think about that, right? So again, it's not, pushing people with data. I think it's just sharing some of these phrases, sharing some of these data points, and asking people what they think. One of my favorite authors to follow, Adam Grant, really good white guy that talks a lot about diversity, but from a psychological perspective, he has a book, Think Again, that I constantly reference, because he's, if we go into things just this way, like I'm going to convince you, you're going to convince me, we usually no one gets convinced. And most people both have a sour experience. So if we can use kind of some questions and some challenging statements, hopefully you're filling up kind of your toolkit, if you will, with some of these. Just a few more data points here. The disconnect in DEI. A lot of CEOs believe their priorities, yet only 44% have developed a strategy. That's an interesting disconnect. It's important, but we don't have a strategy. Like, okay. So that's clearly an opportunity. And that doesn't require a lot of work. I mean, I've done those in a few hours or, over the course of a few days. It doesn't have to be a ton of work, and it can be done very effectively with your existing folks that are passionate about DEI. We also know HR managers have their budget slashed for DEI, which, if you don't have a DEI person, that's also a signal. I mean, depending on your organization size, of course. But if you have an HR manager leading it, the budget's been slashed about half. And then 80% of companies are just going through the motions. And this is self-admitted. This is some SHRM data. SHRM's been studying this for quite some time. I find a lot of people are saying things, but not doing things, much like you. It's all much like y'all shared at the beginning too. So I'll just pause here. I shared a bunch of data with you. I'm sure there's way more. So if you've got other studies you want to message to Catherine or point to us in the poll everywhere, just going to take a minute to just unpack what data points resonated with you. I know I shared a dozen different things. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing the link again in the chat. So again, it's 100% anonymous, and we'll display your answers. If you're having any trouble, feel free to use the chat as well. Or if you have other sources, feel free to add. Gen Z, I know. We got to watch out though. We're not kicking the can to them. I just posted about this on LinkedIn. It's like, let's not. Because I feel like they expected that of millennials too. And then we didn't have any power and we couldn't change any of these systems. So let's make sure that they're equipped to succeed. Yeah, they're future leaders. I'm certainly optimistic. They definitely need tools and resources though. The percentage of people are burnout. Yeah, 76%. I mean, would we accept 76? Well, engagement numbers kind of mirror that. Okay. I think the last Gallup employee engagement data was somewhere around 30% of folks are engaged at work. it's just we accept so little when we can clearly have so much better. The data about the disconnect between talking and doing. Yep, a lot of talk, not a lot of action. I'm just gonna say that. That's perfect timing. And I don't mean to be facetious about this. I'm very much burnout as well. And one of the things that I find therapeutic is getting folks together that are experiencing similar emotions and having a safe place where we can share together. So I encourage you, if there are other tools, resources, data points that you want to sprinkle in, I found these, well, again, I highly recommend subscribing to HBR, McKinsey, and these are mostly free. Lean In does some good stuff too. And then Forbes has a good daily alert too. There's a lot of great contributors from Forbes for DEI as well. So just some ways that you can keep track of all this research coming down. And most of it's, pretty robust studies that are done inside organizations, or like that one from Monster I mentioned. There's a lot of good work being done. Okay. I'll keep us going. So if you got anything to add, feel free. So the next piece I want to talk about was accountability, and why now is the time for accountability. I actually find tools for accountability, peer-to-peer accountability is actually the strongest form of accountability. So if you want to create a little fire around DEI, excitement, I should say, is get somebody that's influential from the majority group to participate, and people take note, like, oh, Dave's over there, right? Like, how do we get some positive peer pressure? Some of our clients use things like badging, say, hey, I went through the inclusive leadership program, the allyship program, or hey, of course, making those ERG leadership positions really coveted. This should not feel like extra work. This should feel like this is something I get to do, not that I have to do. So things like the sponsor position, being really strategic about how those key leaders are and people that can garner interest and support and that people take notice of. I also really love Loretta J. Ross's work. If anyone's familiar with her work, she has a TED Talk about calling folks in versus calling them out. I used to say, call people out, like call them out, hold them accountable. What I found out happened was not the result I was looking for. Shame, blame, a retreat, a defensiveness from the conversation. And so calling folks in is just a subtle adjustment. You've heard me use some of this language already. It's like, hey, what makes you say that? Or hey, what if I told you I have data that shows you're not, that I have data that proves that's wrong? Not you're wrong, proves that's wrong. Right. And so like I love this one. Back to Adam Grant, his work on Think Again. He says, what would it take for you to change your mind? What would it take for you to change your perspective? Because changing our minds, we don't like to do, right? Giving it away. So this sounds again counterintuitive, but if we want to hold people accountable, and it's for now, it's just me and the task force, the council, and I want it to be everyone because it should be, and it should be embedded in the organization. Just handing over a few keys. Hey, you're going to run the meeting this month, or hey, I need your help getting this event together. Whatever it is, if you can delegate, get folks involved, they're going to be a bit more bought in. And so handing over some of our power and sharing our power with folks. I also think the same rules for folks. This really bothers me when, and this is a big struggle in the DI industry, is do we make it mandatory? When we make training programs mandatory, there is a backlash effect. This has been well documented. And we're seeing, there was a New York Times post last month about DEI is doing more harm than good. Just music to my ears. And basically, it was the whole case was it's ineffective because it's being forced. So I get that is actually a real point. But when we say it's highly encouraged or it's expected learning rather than the M word, which signals, this, I think, just fight or flight inside people, like, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to change for this organization. Rather than do that, really encouraging folks, and certainly senior leaders, they need to be accountable for it. I'd say all people leaders, this is an expectation of leadership. And I've seen a pivot to inclusive leadership. I'm not sure what the right language is to this to make it more palatable for the majority group, but a way that we can emphasize that this is just a part of our values, this is a part of our way of doing, and not give free passes to certain people to be a-holes. I mean, to be honest, like, if they're expressing bad behavior, but they're number one in sales, like, that's still not a top performer if they're doing things the wrong way. And as long as we tolerate that bad behavior by high performers, air quotes on purpose, it's just really harmful to the organization. So if we can get out of folks' way, give them the tools, we're seeing a lot of bite-sized tools that we can measure, right? Short videos, short programs, short exercises. We really like short work. We have a workbook of all these activities in our book, Allyship in Action, and a separate workbook of 30 different activities. Hand it to people and say, hey, do this with your team. I mean, it's really all done for you. You can design activities too, to have in existing team meetings. It doesn't always have to be the separate thing. Oh, thanks, Tracy. Just reinforce, inspect what we expect. And we'll talk about measurement as a form of accountability here in a minute. This is some interesting allyship data out of McKinsey. So this was the last Women in the Workplace report. When we think about rising tides lift all boats, that old metaphor, cliche. It is true, though, when we look at the lens of women of color in the workplace that traditionally are the most marginalized group because of the intersections of difference. And this could go for other elements of intersectionality, but for the sake of this study, look at how many people think they're being allies and how many people actually are. I love to just share this slide and be like, what do you see here? Because what I see is a huge opportunity for mentorship programs, sponsorship programs, and not that women need to be fixed, but sponsorship in particular, having someone in power vouching for you on your behalf for your work is really important. Oh, hey. Oh, yeah, that's such a good one, Amber. Yes. That's another one by Brad and Dave. I love Brad and Dave. So Brad Johnson and Dave Smith wrote the book, The Good Guys, and they do a lot of HBR articles. They wrote the foreword for my book, Lead Like an Ally. They're working on a new book too. Two really good white guy, PhD types in the military, just all the things you wouldn't think to be as passionate they are. And they're staying in it for the long haul. Really appreciate them. And they're, doubling down right now on this because there's research to support this. Thanks, Amber, for sharing. Yeah, so this data all comes from the Women in the Workplace. I bookmarked that one in October. You get like a birthday present. Their annual report comes out and it's just like, yes, I love to see it. I love to see positive things happen, although it's usually not. But that's a whole nother thing. It'll be positive, more positive this year. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic. Here's another accountability tool. This is an oldie but goodie. I used to teach this, gosh, 5-6 years ago, but I'm finding a lot of the old tools I used to use with leadership are now coming into the DEI space. So accountability, the other one, change management and the change curve. We're working on some stuff with that now. So the Oz principle, if anyone's familiar with this, it's a book. And it's this whole idea of above the line and below the line behaviors. So when organizations haven't set the tone for what's above the line, what is an inclusive behavior versus what's a non-inclusive behavior, people go rogue, right? They ignore, it's not my job. There's this finger pointing, just tell me what to do. Does anyone get that? Oh, that's my least favorite. Like, no, I cannot tell you what to do. And now I started telling people at the beginning of presentations, I cannot tell you what to do. I am going to give you a whole bunch of options and you decide what you do with it. Or people covering themselves and then waiting and see. So those are the avoiding behaviors, but how do we get people to own it? We have to be clear on the expectation, what's above the line, so what's inclusive and what's not inclusive. And when it's not inclusive, everyone's empowered through positive peer pressure to address that bad non-inclusive behavior. So really simple tool, but a very good book, an oldie but goodie. Also, y'all mentioned performative earlier. Performative is like, it's like saying and not doing. Active is about doing. We need active allyship now more than ever. For the folks that did the black boxes and showed up at the protest and did all the things in 2020 and then stepped back to their, regular life, now that's harmful. That's harmful behavior and it's not acceptable. And we should hold organizations accountable that are saying things and doing other things. And you're seeing Walgreens in the news right now for the abortion pill access. This is going to be, again, people are expecting organizations to lead social change and to be a part of this. So they will be asking questions about, you made this commitment, you set this goal. A lot of organizations set goals for representation numbers that they thought they could hire away. They're not, are finding it's much more complicated than that. So the accountability has to be, okay, what have you actually done? What are the actions? We're not interested in words anymore. Okay, so last piece of the puzzle, and then I definitely want to give plenty of time for your questions. We'll do two more activities too. So tools, if I were to say the 5 most requested things that Catherine and I are getting right now, as Catherine does a lot of our prospecting conversations with folks, so she's hearing a lot of these things too. One is measurement. So we have recently partnered with a measurement service provider, Spectra Diversity. It's a 31 question assessment that's scientifically validated with high correlations to these perceptions match an inclusive culture. So we're really excited about that. It gives you pinpoints the pain, the gap, and then we roadmap to fill in the gaps. So we don't always have to do roadmaps with a measurement tool, but we do like to use some data. So if you've got existing employee engagement data, if you've done a pulse survey recently, if you've done listening sessions or focus groups recently, some of our clients, did it in 2020. Well, it's definitely time for a refresh. A lot has changed in your workforce. You've probably lost about 20% of your workforce has been replaced, if you're like most organizations. So time to, reset. And that's what we're finding too with strategy. A lot of folks build out their strategy again 3 years ago or later. Time to roadmap, time to refresh that roadmap. What are the key priorities? What are the key gaps? What are we going to do? And then targeted training. And again, this magic middle layer, these are the folks that are least engaged. We have a lot of data on this, that the middle layer, the middle manager, is woefully underserved with DEI. Lots vying for their time. Here's the interesting thing about the magic middle. They entered the workforce on average 15, 20, 25 years ago. Someone like me. And DEI was not at all something we talked about in the early 2000s, right? And so we didn't get any training early on. We didn't get the same kind of exposure that senior leadership has, because senior leadership has the board talking to them, the indexes talking to them. I mean, they're held accountable at a different level, so they know it's smart business to do this, and they're being trained and resourced and coached. But that magic middle layer has been left untouched. And not in all organizations. We work with organizations to do like Men as Allies cohort programs. So that's not always the case, but it's usually a targeted program of a handful of folks that are, again, the champions already, which is great that they can be more, but we really need the folks that are still kind of sitting on the sidelines to join the conversation. We're also seeing scenario applications. So one thing we'd love to do is like, hey, what's the problem? Oh, you're having trouble with hiring inclusively. Okay, we've got a program for that. But then give me 3 scenarios, 3 real life scenarios, I don't need to know people's names. I just need to know something that happened. So-and-so said this in an interview, or we asked this question, or we said they're not a cultural fit, whatever it is. Let's play with those scenarios and have people experience the microaggressions, have them experience it in a safe setting where we can have I think this can be fun, and I don't want to have fun at someone's expense. That's not what I'm saying. So I think managers can say, whoa, like what, that happens? And the middle layer especially will say like in disbelief, like, what? Someone said that to you? And it's like, yes. And then people will say, yes, that's happened to me like 20 times. And so that it becomes real for them. Like, wait, that happens here. It happens to you. Oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. So it creates a sense of urgency. And then people get to practice. What would you say? What would you do? So we really like scenarios. And I think that's something you can easily create with your team. Like everyone's got some doozies, right? And we don't need to share personal details. I make it like 2 sentences. So it's super generic. No one's going to know who it is. That's not the point. The point is, how do we learn? How do we use this as an opportunity so this doesn't happen again? I mean, then bite-sized DEI. So short videos. I just attended a national speakers conference over the weekend, and they said, everything's always changing. 1-minute videos for social media. So what do you say in 1 minute? In 12-minute videos for YouTube. I don't know what that means for DEI. I'm not sure I believe those numbers, but all that to say, short. Our attention spans just keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So if we can bite size it, we're actually calling it right sizing DEI now. We just rebranded that. So Catherine, maybe share that webpage. She worked so hard on that this week, and we had some feedback on bite size that was not just not as inclusive as we could be. So I appreciated that feedback, and we made it right sized. But it is small chunks, and it's not to do it as service, right? But are people attending the 90-minute training? They're not attending ours, I'll tell you that, especially if it's opt-in. But if you can make a 5-minute video and an exercise or a 20-minute exercise, and then we talk about it for 10 minutes, people will make more time for that. And, you can increase the frequency. Maybe it was quarterly before and now we do it monthly, but it's a slow drip, and it's the slow drip that really we see moving the needle. So Catherine shared our tool on measurement. Oh, and I had a question come in. What do you recommend for private organizations that don't have public stakeholders? I mean, the business case still applies. A lot of the data we shared earlier. Yeah, I wish it didn't come to that. So is that the NASDAQ? I'm going to mess this up. Sorry, I'm sleep deprived today. But the NASDAQ, I think anybody on their exchange has to have a certain representation of diverse talent. So you're seeing that with publicly held big, large companies, and global companies, quite frankly, have to get with it. Like, they can't pretend this isn't happening. But private, small, medium-sized companies, I'm seeing this a lot. I think the biggest held private company is Cargill here in the United States. I think I'm getting that right. That used to be the case. They're very big. I haven't seen them do a lot in the diversity space. So I don't know. I mean, I think we all think that our industries or our, vertical is unique and different. It still always goes back to what matters to us. What are our values? What are our priorities? How does DEI fit in with that? And if we don't have a clear map to that, and our values, our purpose, our culture, our mission aren't in any way connected to DEI, then I would say that's probably not going to be relevant for too long. But we really need to embed it into the business. So I appreciate that question. So Catherine shared the sample assessment. I won't belabor this. We'll share that with you. If you've done assessments already, it's always good to just get a temperature check on folks. Ideally, you do the whole organization, but even if you just do leadership, there's a big disparity usually between front lines and leadership, the whole thing. Leaders think they're doing a better job than they are. But that data is really hard to run from. So the idea with measurement right now is that's accountability at its finest. So if I've got data that says most people disagree that we manage bias effectively, then I can't lie. I can't pretend that problem doesn't exist. So this is really to help point out the gap areas, solidify the priorities, and then we like to go into road mapping modes. This is where we're spending a lot of our time right now, gathering some inclusion data. So you don't have to do a full-blown assessment, but you do need to get some data. Okay. And that can be done through listening sessions, a short survey. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Of course, we have, proven scientifically, proven models too. Gather the representation data, which our spectrum report gathers: age, gender, non-binary too, race, ethnicity, veteran, and disability, and LGBTQ. So it covers a pretty wide variety of representation data, so you don't have to mine your HRIS system for that. And then have the purpose and have the plan and set those priorities. And then each focus area, we build out an action plan for that. So what's the goal? What are the key activities? Who's doing what? What resources do we need? What's the timeline? Really simple tool. But it's a good communication plan. I saw that in the chat as well. So Catherine just shared that. That's a good freebie. Feel free to take that or share that with folks. We're using that a lot right now just to help people with lower budgets, help them figure out what's next. And I want to be clear too. I mean, I think with DEI, you don't have to invest a ton of money in I think it's a money or time thing, right? So do you have time? Do you have money? I think given budget cuts, we can still do really creative things. One of the things we have is a resource list with tons of podcasts, videos, books. And some of our clients, that's what they're doing right now. They're just taking a video and having a discussion with folks. We did a book club last month for Black History Month. Not that it should be celebrated that way, and it certainly should be celebrated year round, full disclaimer. But just finding ways to meet people where they're at. And we have always called our training inclusive leadership training. We've called it DEI training in the past too, but I have seen an increased appetite for inclusive leadership training. And I am not a proponent of changing words to please people, but I do think this makes it more palatable to bring in that majority, that magic middle group. And that's something that we're seeing on, again, accountability, change, leading through change inclusively. We can weave in inclusion onto these things and not disservice the point of diversity and inclusion, but meet them where they're at with the skills that they need, and understanding that inclusion is a part of that if they don't get that yet. And then the scenario-based learning, again, find the topic. The hot topics we're seeing right now, still a lot with bias, but probably more specific forms of bias like gender bias, bias in hiring, bias in performance reviews. Those are big systemic problems. Just find the topic and then ask folks around, hey, do you have a scenario, a time when, past, present, where you've heard from a friend? Let's make some general scenarios and let's talk about it openly as a group. And I think, again, this can be a healthy exercise for folks to really learn and to grow. And then bite-sized or right-sized DEI, Catherine shared that link in the chat if you want some ideas. The idea is that we take one thing, a bite-sized, a short video, a blog, an article, a thought question, a discussion guide, a podcast, whatever it is, based on the need, and we map that. And then you have a calendar of content for the year where we can just kind of do a slow drip in your newsletter, in your programming, in your employee resource group. So you have it already pre-planned for the year. But again, it doesn't take a massive investment to do that. So I'll pause here and love to take y'all's questions. What tools do you find most helpful? So of the 5, I think you can rank them, but I'm just curious, and then add to it in the chat if you want to, other things. These are the 5, again, I would say over the last 6 months. So when things started to get real murky and slow down, it was Q4 for us. I think we started to notice in October. So this is 6 months worth of a lot of prospecting conversations, a lot of sales conversations that have not always gone anywhere. But what people want are these seem to be the hot topics. The road mapping. And that's the road mapping's the big one we're seeing. The middle layer. This is good intel for all of us. It's actually really helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for y'all. Measurement. Yeah, the whole ROI thing. Just really struggle with this because it's not the kind of thing you can show an instant ROI on. But if we could, we love to do pre and post knowledge checks, at least to show the knowledge increased by 20% on this topic. What's that worth to you? It's not always easy to directly quantify. Oh, bite size, right size took a bump at the end. Oh, that's interesting. Very cool. Well, check out the webpage. And again, no pressure. You don't have to work with us. But if you do want to have a conversation, we'd love to talk with you. If that gives you some ideas for the kind of things to include. Thanks, Amber. It's good to see you. If it gives you some ideas for the kinds of things to include, that's, again, based on a lot of conversations we've been having. A lot. Nana. I look at measurement in the sense of quantifying the implementation of initiatives in the strategic plan, not necessarily the ROI. Yeah, I agree. I think activities, measuring this is how many activities we did this year. If we can get to attitude shift or behavior change, I've been doing training, leading training, facilitating training for 15 years. That is always the question that people ask, well, how do we know this achieved our goal? It's like, well, what is our goal? How are we measuring our goal? Right. So asking that question before we do it, and it does take time. Yeah, it absolutely does take time. Cool. I'd love for everybody just to share one thing you're walking away with today. This was a quick hour. Wow, this went by really quick. I don't know if that's because I'm sleep deprived from my overnight flight last night. So forgive me for my baggy eyes, but it's refreshing. It is energizing to be with like-minded folks. And there's so many of us. I mean, most of the research shows that most people, I would hope, care about diversity and inclusion. Now, are they doing diversity and inclusion is a different story, as we've been talking about today. But there's more of us in the majority than in the minority. And I think some days it feels like to me that we're under attack, that the minority is pushing back on us. But I gotta believe there's more of us. Yeah, tons of resources on the business case. Yes, I get tired of the business case, but Gen Z, the Edelman data, all those things, Catherine, everyone that registered, you'll get all these links in your inbox shortly. So don't feel like you had to take copious notes, but you should have a conversation with somebody about it. Ideally, a senior level leader that has, access to things. Yeah, it's validating. I hear you. I get in my head a lot and I take it personally. Like this is all happening to me, and it's not. There's so many of us that are experiencing this, sadly. And I think a lot of us anticipated this, a few years ago when things got, so busy. I was like, how long is this going to last? And then it lasted a couple years. Well, we are seeing a bit of that backlash and retreat, but we're stronger together. the reminder to call people in. Yeah, the more we can avoid burnout and leverage sponsorship. Yeah, those are some great takeaways. Thanks, y'all. I'm at time, so I wanted to. Oh, we were going to give away a book too. So I've actually got a trivia question for anyone that can stick around, and then we'll take your questions too. Sorry, I did not manage time very well today. The trivia question, the first one to answer this correctly is name one data point for the why for DEI. So some of that business case stuff. You can go ahead and put it in here. First person to answer on the chat, go ahead and pick one of those and we'll send you a free book. And what the book has is those activities. So there's a whole workbook, but there's each chapter has a few activities on like empathy, vulnerability, trust building exercises, that kind of thing. Tracy, you got it. Awesome. We'll get that to you. We will get that to you. I think we know where to find you, Tracy. So thank you for that. We'll get you a free copy. And if you've already got one, give one to a trusted ally. All right. So ask us anything, please, please ask us anything. I'd love to hear any questions you have that I haven't gotten to. And I know we're at time, so if folks have to drop, totally appreciate you being here with us today. And thanks for just keeping your energy. We need all of us together in this work. And the runway is coming up on the end of the runway. We're just not there yet. But people know that this matters. Thanks, John. Johnavie. I think I said that correctly. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Tayana. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, we'd love to keep the conversation going. Thank you. Jacinta, what does a mature model of DEI measurement look like? And since we're at the end, that's my contact info. Catherine will send all this to you. So feel free, if I didn't get to a question or you got to drop, just send us a note. Love to keep the conversation lines open, chat with you more. But the question that was asked, DEI measurement. So the sample report we'll share with you, for me, it's two things. I think you need demographic representation data, and it's not just that. Please don't hear me that way. And it needs to cover more than race and gender. So that's why we like the Spectra tool, because it breaks down everything from age, race, gender, LGBTQ, veteran, et cetera. And then attitudinal data. So we want to measure perceptions around DEI. How inclusive of a workplace is this? How much do I trust my manager? How much are people held accountable for bad behavior? And people do that on a sliding scale. And then you get the averages and a heat map. So you can easily see like, ooh, this one's tricky. Or, ooh, we have an opportunity here. This might be something we need to prioritize. So kind of twofold. And that's on the roadmap too, the demographics and the inclusion data. Good stuff, y'all. Stay in touch. I mean it. You're not alone. I'm going to take, I'm just going to take some self-care time here in the spring, a few days a week to recharge. That's my way of coping. However, I would love, to stay in touch with y'all and have a chat about what things look like in your world. And if we ever can be of help, we probably have a tool, a resource, something we can point you to. So just send me a message if you're looking for something, or if you find something cool. We share those in our newsletter too, what our community members are interested in. So thanks, y'all. Thanks, Camilla. Thanks, Jacinta. Thanks, April. Bye.